The fever broke at 2:47 in the morning, and nobody in that house knew why. A 4-year-old boy had climbed onto a chair beside the most feared man in Seoul, dragged 3 rooms just to reach him, and pressed a small, wet towel to a forehead burning hot enough to scare a grown man. "My mommy says sick people shouldn't be alone." That was the whole sentence. No music swelling behind it. No one filming it for proof. Just a boy doing something none of the adults being paid to protect this man had the courage to do. Touch him like he was a person and not a weapon. Nobody else had come near Kwon Jae-rok in 3 days. Not the doctors he paid by the hour. Not the guards stationed outside his gate. Every one of them was simply waiting, quietly, patiently, to see if he'd die, because a dead boss was easier to plan around than a dying one. The boy didn't know any of that. He didn't know the name Kwon Jae-rok made grown men lower their eyes in every district of the city. He knew only what his mother had taught him his whole short life. Sick people shouldn't be alone. That was the whole rule. He didn't ask what the man had done to end up this alone. He just knew it wasn't allowed. Down the hall, his mother was on her knees scrubbing a floor that didn't need scrubbing, because scrubbing floors was safer than sitting still with everything she'd left behind in America. She had no idea her son was gone. She had no idea he had just walked into the room of the most dangerous man in the city, and that by morning, one small act of kindness was going to put both of their lives in danger. Stay with me until the end of this one. You're going to want to know how it ends. Welcome to Afro-Korean Love Empire. If you love emotional Afro-Korean Mafia romance stories, the kind filled with danger, forbidden love, powerful men, brave black women, and love that has to survive real pain, subscribe right now so you don't miss the next one. Now let's go back to the beginning, to understand exactly how a black single mother and her son ended up inside the most feared house in Seoul. Niria Vale did not come to Korea looking for anything except quiet. 3 years earlier she'd been standing in a kitchen in Georgia, holding a phone with her husband's name still on the screen, and she remembered thinking, not even about the affair. Not even about the woman. Just about how long she'd been invisible in her own home before she'd even noticed. She didn't leave because he hit her. He never hit her. She left because she got so tired of being furniture in a house she paid rent for. Her mother had come to America with 2 suitcases and a Bible and a saying she repeated so often it stopped sounding like advice and started sounding like scripture. Kindness costs nothing. Respect costs nothing. Hard work costs nothing. Even when the world is cruel to you, it costs you nothing to not be cruel back. Niria raised Cairo on those same 3 sentences. Say thank you. Never laugh at somebody's pain. If you see somebody sick or somebody lonely, you sit next to them. You don't have to fix them. You just sit. She never imagined that lesson would end up saving a criminal. The divorce itself had been quiet, which somehow made it worse. No screaming. No slammed doors. Just a slow unraveling over 2 years that she only recognized, in hindsight, as unraveling at all. She remembered the exact night she knew it was over, not the night she found the messages, but 3 weeks before that, at her own birthday dinner, when her husband had spent the entire meal on his phone and she'd realized, with a kind of cold clarity, that she couldn't remember the last time he'd asked her a single question about her own day. I kept thinking if I just worked harder at it, she told the pantry maid once, one of the only people in that mansion she'd let herself get close to. Harder at the marriage. Harder at being what he needed. Like it was a job I was failing at instead of just a person he'd stopped choosing. That's not failure, the older woman said. That's just what it feels like when somebody stops seeing you. It's not the same thing, even if it feels identical. Niria hadn't cried about it in front of anyone in over a year. She didn't cry then either. But she'd sat with that sentence a long time afterward, turning it over, the way you turn over something too heavy to carry but too important to put down. Cairo had been 2 when the marriage finally ended on paper. He didn't remember his father's voice anymore, not really, just a vague warmth from photographs, a name he used carefully, like he wasn't sure it belonged to him. Niria had promised herself, packing those 2 suitcases the same way her own mother once had, that her son would never once learn to make himself smaller to keep a house peaceful. She didn't know yet that the house waiting for them in Seoul would test that promise in ways she never could have imagined. The job listing hadn't said whose house it was. It said, private residence, live-in staff, competitive pay, discretion required. Niria had been desperate enough, new country, new visa, 4-year-old on her hip, that she didn't ask enough questions before she signed. She found out on her second day, from another maid whispering in the pantry like the walls themselves were listening. You know whose house this is? I know it's a rich man's house, Niria said. That's all I need to know. The other woman, older, tired around the eyes in a specific way, shook her head slowly. Kwon Jae-rok, she whispered. You don't say that name loud in this house. Niria didn't understand yet. Not really. She understood clubs and hotels and businesses with his name quietly attached to them, glossy and legal on paper. She didn't understand, not that first week, what sat underneath all of it. The debts. The fear. The men who lowered their eyes when he walked a hallway like the air itself owed him something. She just knew the staff moved differently in this house. Quicker. Quieter. Like everyone was auditioning for the right to keep breathing. She met him properly on day 4, and it lasted 4 seconds. He came down a staircase she was cleaning, dressed like a man going to a funeral he didn't care about, and his eyes passed over her exactly once. Not cruel. Not kind. Just catalogued. Filed away. A new piece of furniture registered and dismissed. She didn't flinch. She didn't look down like the other staff did. She just kept mopping. Something in that, the not flinching, made him pause on the 3rd step for exactly 1 second longer than he needed to. Then he kept walking. Neither of them thought about it again. Not until the fever. The house itself unsettled her more than the man did. It was beautiful the way a museum is beautiful, nothing in it built to be touched, nothing in it built for comfort. Marble floors that echoed every footstep back at you like an accusation. A kitchen bigger than her entire apartment back home, staffed by people who spoke to her in careful, clipped Korean because they'd been told to assume she understood less than she did. She understood plenty. She just kept it to herself. What she noticed most, in that first month, was how nobody in that house looked happy. Not the guards at the gate. Not the driver who ferried unnamed men in and out at strange hours. Not the doctor who came twice a week and left looking more exhausted each visit, like he was tending a garden that refused to grow. Everyone obeyed Kwon Jae-rok. Nobody, in that entire mansion, appeared to actually care whether he lived or died. She thought that was strange the first time she noticed it. By the 3rd week, it had started to feel unbearably sad. The night it happened, the rain hadn't stopped since noon. Niria was on the east wing, on her knees scrubbing a floor that was already clean because her supervisor liked to invent tasks rather than admit there was nothing left to do. Cairo was supposed to be asleep in the small staff quarters they shared. He wasn't. He'd woken from a bad dream, he got them sometimes, about the divorce, about doors slamming, though he was too young to know that's what the dreams were about, and he'd gone looking for his mother the way he always did. He got the wrong hallway. He heard the coughing before he saw the door. A wet, ragged sound, the kind that made even a 4-year-old's body go still and careful. He pushed the door open slowly, the way you open a door when you already suspect something's wrong on the other side. Kwon Jae-rok was alone in a bed the size of a small boat, soaked through with sweat, his breathing shallow and uneven, a glass of water untouched on the nightstand 3 feet from a hand too weak to reach it. No nurse. No guard. No lieutenant standing vigil. Just a man the whole city feared, dying quietly with nobody in the room. Cairo did not know who he was. He did not know the name Kwon Jae-rok meant fear in every district of Seoul. He knew only what he'd been taught his whole short life. Sick people shouldn't be alone. He dragged a chair from the corner of the room, the legs scraping loud against the marble, loud enough that in any other circumstance a guard would have come running. Nobody came. He climbed up. He found a small cloth on the nightstand, meant for something else entirely, and dipped it into the water glass, and pressed it, clumsy and careful, against a forehead burning hot enough to scare him. "Mister," he whispered. "You're really hot." No answer. Just that ragged breathing. Cairo settled in like this was simply a job now, the way children commit fully and instantly to a task once they've decided it matters. He kept the towel there, re-wetting it every few minutes, patient in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the woman who'd raised him. "My mommy says sick people shouldn't be alone," he said again, quieter this time, mostly to himself. Somewhere in that fevered, half-conscious dark, Kwon Jae-rok's body did something his doctors couldn't explain the next morning. It fought back. Niria found them an hour later, and her heart nearly stopped in her chest. Her son. Asleep now, slumped against the arm of the chair, one small hand still resting near the damp towel on the pillow. And the man, the most feared man in Seoul, if the whispers in the pantry were true, breathing slow and even for the first time in days, color returned to a face that had been gray at dinner. She didn't know whether to scream or cry or run. She scooped Cairo up without waking him, murmuring apologies to a room that couldn't hear her, backing toward the door with her heart slamming so hard she thought it might wake the whole house. She was 3 steps from the threshold when a voice, rough, cracked, barely audible, stopped her cold. "Leave him." She froze. Jae-rok's eyes were open. Barely. Fixed not on her, but on the empty space beside the bed where the boy had just been. "He's tired," Niria managed. "I'm sorry, sir," he wandered off, "he didn't mean any." "Leave him," Jae-rok said again, weaker this time. "Just for tonight." She didn't understand the request. She understood the tone underneath it, though, something she hadn't expected to hear in that house at all. It sounded like begging. "If you need to know whether he survives the night, stay right here. Comment, towel, below if this story already has you locked in, hit that like button, and let's find out together what happens when he wakes up." He woke at noon the following day, and the first words out of his mouth were not about his empire. Not about the 3 lieutenants circling his bed like patient vultures. Not about the numbers his accountant had been trying to hand him for a week. Not about the whispers already moving through the organization about who would take his chair if this fever had gone the other way. "Where is the boy?" he said, to a room full of men who had no idea what he meant. His head of staff, a stiff, nervous man named Do-yun, stammered through an explanation that took 3 tries to land properly. The maid's son. Wandered in. Should never have happened. Would be dealt with. Would not happen again. "Bring them to me," Jae-rok said. "Both of them." Do-yun's face did something complicated. "Sir, with respect, the boy is 4. He's not." "I said bring them." Nobody argued with that voice a second time in that house. Nobody ever had. Niria stood in that bedroom an hour later with Cairo's hand gripped tight in hers, bracing for the worst version of every story she'd heard whispered in that pantry. Jae-rok was propped up against pillows now, still pale, still visibly weak, but alert. His eyes found Cairo first. Not her. "Cairo. You put a towel on my head," he said. Not a question. Cairo, entirely unbothered by the fact that this man's reputation made grown security guards lower their eyes, nodded matter-of-factly. "You were really hot," he said. "Hotter than my mommy gets when she has a cold." "Why did you do that?" Cairo shrugged, the universal shrug of a child explaining something so obvious it barely needs saying. Because you were alone, he said. My mommy says sick people shouldn't be alone. The room went very still. Niria watched something move behind Jae-rock's eyes that she couldn't name yet. She wouldn't have the vocabulary for it for weeks, but it looked almost like grief. Not for himself. For something further back. Something old. Your mother is right, he said finally, quietly, like the words cost him something to say out loud. Not many people know that. Niria found her voice then, careful, measured, the voice of a woman who had learned the hard way not to trust generosity from powerful men. I apologize for the intrusion, sir. It won't happen again. It's not an intrusion, Jae-rock said, still not looking at her. Still looking at the boy. It's the first time in 3 years someone in this house has touched me without being told to. Nobody in that room knew what to do with a sentence like that. Cairo, at least, had an idea. You look sad, he said simply. Are you sad because you're lonely? Jae-rock did not answer that. He didn't have to. The silence answered for him. What happened over the following 2 weeks was not romance. Not yet. It was something smaller and stranger, a house slowly reorganizing itself around 2 people who were never supposed to be visible at all. Better meals started appearing in the staff quarters. A warmer room, unrequested. New clothes for Cairo, sized correctly without anyone asking his measurements, which unsettled Niria more than it comforted her. Powerful men don't do favors, she told the older maid in the pantry, the same one who'd warned her about his name that first week. They make investments. And investments come with a bill eventually. The older woman just looked at her for a long moment. Maybe, she said. Or maybe he just remembered what it felt like to be looked after, and he doesn't know how to say thank you except like this. Niria didn't believe that. Not for a long time. But Cairo had already stopped being afraid of the tall silent man in the big house, and had started calling him something that made even the guards at the gate crack a smile the first time they heard it. Mr. Tower, Cairo announced one evening, apropos of nothing, while Jae-rock sat across the room reading something on his phone with the particular stillness of a man pretending he wasn't listening to a 4-year-old. Excuse me, Jae-rock said. You're tall, Cairo said, like this was self-evident. And you don't talk much. And you're kind of by yourself all the time. Like the towers outside. They're tall and quiet and lonely too. Jae-rock did not respond right away. I don't like that, he said finally. Cairo, entirely unbothered, kept eating his rice. He kept calling him Mr. Tower anyway. By the second week, Jae-rock had stopped correcting him. The first real conversation between Niria and Jae-rock happened at 1 in the morning, in a kitchen neither of them was supposed to be in. She was there because Cairo had woken with a bad dream again and she needed something warm to settle him back to sleep. Jae-rock was there because sleep had stopped coming easily to him even before the fever, and some nights the only quiet he could find in that entire mansion was standing in a kitchen at an hour when nobody would ask him anything. He found her heating milk on the stove, Cairo already dozing again on the small kitchen bench, wrapped in a blanket too big for him. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. You don't trust me, Jae-rock said eventually. Not accusing. Just observing, the way you'd note weather. No, Niria said. She didn't dress it up. I don't. Because of what I am. Because of what powerful men usually are. She stirred the milk, kept her eyes on it rather than him. I've met kind faces before. They don't always come with kind hands. He was quiet at that. Quiet long enough that she glanced up, expecting anger. She found something closer to respect instead. Fair, he said. She hadn't expected that word from him. Not once. Can I ask you something, she said, surprising herself with the boldness of it. He nodded. Why does everyone in this house look at you like they're waiting for something bad to happen to you? Not scared of you exactly. Waiting. Something tightened in his jaw. Because most of them are, he said quietly. Waiting for me to die so someone else can sit in my chair. It's not personal. It's just how this works. You build something on fear, fear is all it ever gives you back. Niria set the spoon down. Fear can make people quiet, she said slowly, choosing the words with care, but it cannot make them safe. You've built a house full of people who obey you. That's not the same as people who'd grieve you. He looked at her for a long moment. Really looked, the way he hadn't on the staircase that first week. No one has said something like that to me in 15 years, he said. Maybe that's the problem, she said. Not the empire. The 15 years. He didn't answer that. But he didn't argue either. That kitchen conversation became the thing neither of them talked about, but both of them returned to. Some nights it was just tea and silence. Some nights it was Cairo, half asleep, mumbling something that made them both laugh quietly so they wouldn't wake him. Some nights it was harder conversations, about her divorce, in careful pieces, never all at once. About his father, who had built this empire first and handed it to him along with every debt and every enemy that came attached. He never asked if I wanted it, J-Rock admitted once, staring into a cup he wasn't drinking from. He just handed it to me. Like a family name. Like it was mine whether I wanted it or not. Did you ever tell him you didn't? You didn't tell my father things, J-Rock said. You just carried what he gave you. Niria thought of her own mother, and the 3 sentences she'd carried her whole life without ever once resenting the weight of them. Some things you carry because they're heavy, she said. Some things you carry because they're yours. I think you've spent your whole life confusing the two. He didn't sleep that night. Not because he was troubled. Because, for the first time in longer than he could remember, his mind had gone quiet enough to simply rest instead of calculate. There were other nights, too, smaller ones, quieter ones, the kind that never make it into the version of a story people tell out loud, but that builds something real all the same. One evening Cairo insisted on teaching J-Rock how to fold paper into a turtle, a skill he'd picked up from a picture book Niria read him so often the spine had gone soft. You're doing it wrong, Cairo said, not unkindly, taking the paper back out of hands that had once, according to whispers Niria still hadn't fully confirmed, done far more dangerous things than fold paper. You have to make the corner meet the corner. Not almost. All the way. I built a business worth more than this house, J-Rock said dryly, and I cannot fold a turtle. That's okay, Cairo said, with the total, unbothered confidence of a 4-year-old delivering a verdict. Some things you have to be patient to learn. My mommy says patient people get further than smart people. Your mother says a great many things. She's usually right, Cairo said. You should listen to her more. J-Rock glanced across the room to where Niria stood pretending not to listen, arms crossed, the corner of her mouth fighting a smile she didn't want to give away yet. I'm starting to notice that, he said. She rolled her eyes at him. But she didn't argue. Not every night in that kitchen was soft, though. Some nights the weight of what he carried pressed through even when he tried to keep it out. Do you ever regret any of it? She asked him once, late, when Cairo had finally drifted off between them on the small kitchen bench. The empire. The fear. All of it. J-Rock was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. I regret that I stopped noticing it was a choice, he said finally. Somewhere in the last 10 years I stopped asking myself if I wanted this life and started only asking how to survive it better. Those aren't the same question. I forgot that. What changed? A 4-year-old put a towel on my head, he said, and something almost like a laugh moved through the words, tired and real. I know how that sounds. It sounds true, Niria said. That's rarer than it sounds simple. He looked at her for a long moment across the low kitchen light. You ask harder questions than anyone who's worked in this house in 15 years, he said. Everyone else learned a long time ago not to ask me anything at all. Maybe that's exactly what's been wrong with this house, she said quietly. Not the money. Not even the fear. Just, nobody left who was brave enough to ask you anything real. He didn't have an answer for that. He didn't try to give her one. He just let the silence sit there, comfortable for the first time in longer than he could remember, and didn't rush to fill it the way he filled every other silence in his life with calculation and control. Not everyone in that house was resting easy, though. Han Minsuk had been Jae-rok's most trusted lieutenant for 6 years, and he smiled more than anyone else in the organization, which should have told Niria something the very first time she met him. Men who smile that easily in a house built on fear are usually smiling at something you can't see yet. He watched the staff quarters shift in status. Watched the boys' laughter start echoing down hallways that used to only hold silence. Watched his boss, his mark, his eventual replacement's obstacle, start looking less like a man to be managed and more like a man who might actually recover his grip. That was a problem. For 6 months, Han Minsuk had been managing a slow poison through a series of teas and tonics prescribed by a doctor he'd personally selected and personally paid, twice, once by the organization and once, quietly, by himself. A weakening. Patient. Untraceable. Meant to hollow Jae-rok out slowly enough that his death would look like nature rather than murder, and slow enough that by the time it finished its work, Han Minsuk would already have every loyalty secured for the transition. The boy's towel had interrupted 6 months of careful work in one single night. Han Minsuk did not smile about that in private. At the dinner table, though, 3 nights later, he smiled plenty. He watched Jae-rok laugh, actually laugh, quiet and brief but real, at something Cairo had said about turtles being braver than they looked, and Han Minsuk's eyes went cold behind the smile for exactly 4 seconds. Jae-rok caught it. Neither man said a word. They didn't have to. Some things are understood entirely in silence, between 2 men who've spent their whole lives reading rooms for exactly this kind of look. Niria noticed it too, though she didn't have Jae-rok's 15 years of reading rooms to draw on. She noticed it the way anyone notices a draft in a house that's supposed to be sealed tight, a small, cold feeling with no clear source. That man, she said to Jae-rok one night, after Han Minsuk had left the dinner table early, that same smile fixed in place right up until the door closed behind him. He watches Cairo like he's doing math. He watches everyone like he's doing math, Jae-rok said. It's why I trusted him for 6 years. A man who calculates everything rarely does anything reckless. That's not comforting, Niria said. That sounds like a different kind of dangerous. Not less. Jae-rok didn't answer right away. He was quiet in the particular way she'd learned meant he was turning something over, testing its weight before he said it out loud. I've been tired more than usual, he admitted finally. The doctor says it's the recovery. Slow. Normal. Do you believe him? He looked at her. I didn't, until you asked it like that, he said quietly. She tried to raise it again 2 nights later, and this time he brushed it off entirely, the old walls coming back up fast and practiced. You're imagining threats where there's only paperwork, he said. Minsuk has run half my operations without complaint for 6 years. I don't have room right now to chase suspicion on top of everything else. I'm not asking you to chase anything, she said. I'm asking you to notice. I notice everything, he said, sharper than he meant to. It's the only reason I'm still alive. The silence after that was not the comfortable kind. She left the kitchen without another word, and he sat alone with his tea going cold, hating himself a little for the sharpness, and hating more that some small, quiet part of him had heard her warning and filed it away anyway, the way he filed away everything, whether he wanted to admit it yet or not. He didn't apologize that night. He told himself there would be time later. He didn't yet understand how little time he actually had left before the ground beneath all of them shifted for good. Niria tried to leave twice that month. The first time, she simply packed a bag and told the head of staff she'd found other work. "Thank you for the opportunity." Do-yoon's face went pale in a way that had nothing to do with permission and everything to do with fear of what happened to staff who left without Jae-rock's blessing. "It's not that simple," he told her carefully. "Nothing leaves this house without going through the front gate. And the front gate doesn't open without a name being checked against a list. Am I a prisoner here?" "You're valuable," Do-yoon said, which wasn't an answer, and both of them knew it. The second time, she went straight to Jae-rock himself, Cairo's hand gripped in hers, jaw set with the particular steel of a woman who had already survived one situation she couldn't control and refused to let this become a second one. "I want to leave," she said. "Both of us. I need you to let us leave." Jae-rock studied her for a long moment. "You think I'm keeping you here," he said. "I think this house doesn't let people go easily. I've seen how the gate works." "The gate isn't for you," he said quietly. "It was never for you." "Then who is it for?" He didn't answer that directly. He looked toward the window instead, toward the gardens beyond it, toward a world he'd spent 15 years making sure never touched the people he cared about, because caring about people, in his line of work, had only ever gotten them hurt. "There are people who would use you against me now," he said finally. "Not because of anything you did. Because of what you've become to me. That's a more dangerous thing to be in this house than an enemy." Niria felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What have I become to you?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer that one either. But he didn't look away from her this time. The garden had always been Cairo's favorite part of the mansion, the one place in that entire cold, echoing house that felt built for a child instead of merely tolerating one. There was a swing near the back wall, half hidden by a hedge, that the old gardener had put up years ago for a grandchild who'd never come to visit. Cairo claimed it the very first week. He'd swing there for hours some afternoons while Niria worked nearby, singing to himself, narrating elaborate stories about turtles and towers to an audience of nobody. It was where he was, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, when everything changed. Niria had stepped inside for 11 minutes. 11. She would count them later, over and over, in the version of that day that replayed behind her eyes for the rest of her life. 11 minutes to fold a basket of laundry, because the driver, the regular one, the one who always kept an eye on the garden gate when she was inside, had been reassigned that morning without explanation, replaced by someone new, someone she didn't recognize. She came back outside to an empty swing, still moving slightly in a breeze that hadn't been strong enough to move it on its own. A small backpack lay abandoned in the grass. "Cairo?" No answer. "Cairo?" The rain started then, sudden and hard, the kind that turns a garden path to mud in under a minute. She was screaming his name before she'd even fully registered she was running, checking the hedges, the shed, the gate that should have been locked, that stood open 6 inches, just wide enough. He was gone. If your stomach just dropped the way hers did, comment, "Please be okay," below. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because we need every one of you here for this. Jae-rock was in a meeting when Do-yoon burst through the door without knocking, which had not happened once in 6 years of employment, and said 4 words that emptied every other thought from his mind at once. "The boy is gone." Jae-rock did not shout. He did not throw anything, did not slam a fist against the table the way the lieutenants in that room half expected him to. He simply went very still, the particular stillness of a man whose entire body has just rerouted every resource it has toward a single, narrow purpose. "Every camera," he said quietly. "Every gate log. Every driver's phone. Now." The room moved. He found Niria in the garden 4 minutes later, soaked through, on her knees in the mud where the backpack still lay, her voice gone hoarse from screaming a name into rain that swallowed the sound whole. He crouched beside her. He did not touch her. He simply matched her stillness, forced his own breathing steady, because one of them needed to be steady and it clearly wasn't going to be her. "I will find him," he said. "You don't know that," she said, and it wasn't an accusation. It was simply a woman who had learned, the hard way, not to trust promises from men with power. "I know this house," he said. "I know every road out of this district. I know every man Han Minsuk has ever paid. If your son is anywhere within 100 kilometers of here, I will find him tonight." Niria looked at him, really looked, mud on her hands, rain in her hair, for years of careful distance collapsing in the space of a single sentence. "Why do you care this much?" she said, and her voice cracked on the last word. Jae-rock didn't answer with words. He stood, and he started giving orders that would end, before the night was finished, with him dismantling the very foundation of the empire that had made him untouchable for 15 years. The trail led exactly where it needed to the new driver, the one reassigned without explanation that morning, whose real employer turned out not to be Jae-rock's household staff at all, but a name that made 3 separate lieutenants go quiet when Do-yeon said it aloud. Han Min-suk. Jae-rock stood in his own study 40 minutes later, staring at surveillance footage of his most trusted lieutenant of 6 years directing a car through a service gate with a small, frightened boy in the back seat, and something in his chest went cold in a way the fever never had. Niria stood behind him in that study, arms wrapped around herself, watching the same grainy footage loop a second time, then a third, as if watching it enough times might change what it showed. "You said he was trustworthy," she said, and it came out sharper than she meant it to, sharper than she'd ever spoken to him before. "You said 6 years. I know what I said." "Then how?" Her voice broke. She steadied it by force. "How did you not see this?" Jae-rock didn't defend himself. He'd spent 15 years defending decisions, justifying them, explaining the calculation behind every choice he'd ever made. He found, standing in that study with her son's face frozen on a screen in front of him, that he had no interest in defending anything anymore. "I saw it 3 nights ago," he admitted. "At the dinner table. I saw it in his face and I told myself I was imagining it because dealing with it meant admitting how much I'd let myself trust the wrong things for the wrong reasons. That's on me. Not you. Not Cairo. Me." Niria stared at him. "I don't want an apology," she said quietly. "I want my son back. Then stop asking me questions and let me go get him." She didn't stop him. But she didn't step aside easily either. She gripped his arm once, hard, before he reached the door, and made him look at her. "If anything happens to him," she said, and didn't finish the sentence, because she didn't need to. The threat lived entirely in the silence after it. "Nothing will happen to him," Jae-rock said. "I promise you that." "You don't get to promise things like that." "No," he agreed. "But I'm going to keep it anyway." He thought, briefly, of a wet towel on his forehead. Of a small voice saying sick people shouldn't be alone, with no idea what kind of man he was tending to. He thought of 6 years of loyalty that had apparently been a performance the entire time. He picked up his phone. "Bring the car around," he said. "And bring my gun." Do-yeon caught him at the door, face pale, voice low and urgent in the way of a man who knows he's about to say something his boss doesn't want to hear. "Sir, if you go in there alone, and this goes wrong, the whole organization falls apart by morning. You know that. Let the men come with you. Let us do this the way it's always been done." Jae-rock didn't stop moving. "The way it's always been done is exactly what got a 4-year-old put in the back of a car," he said. "I'm done doing it the way it's always been done. And if Minsuk has more men there than we think, then I hope he's smart enough to know killing me solves nothing," Jae-rock said. "Because if he's not, if that boy is hurt in any way tonight, there won't be an organization left standing by morning for anyone to inherit. Not his. Not mine. Nothing." Do-yeon had worked in that house for 6 years. He had never once heard that particular tone in his employer's voice. He stepped aside. Bring the car around, Jae-rock said again, quieter now. And find out exactly where Niria is. I don't want her walking into this behind me. This is the part where everything either falls apart or comes together. Comment below what you think Jae-rock does next, like this video if you're rooting for him, because the next few minutes decide everything for all three of them. The warehouse Han Minsuk had chosen was 20 minutes outside the city, the kind of place built for exactly this purpose and no other, quiet, isolated, forgettable. Cairo sat on a folding chair in the corner of a cold room, his backpack finally returned to him by a guard who at least had the decency to look uncomfortable about the whole thing, his small hands wrapped tightly around the straps. He wasn't crying. He'd cried for the first 10 minutes, quietly, the way children cry when they're scared but trying to be brave about it, and then he'd stopped, because crying wasn't doing anything and he needed to think. Stop, breathe, think. His mother's words, borrowed and repeated in his head like a small prayer. Han Minsuk crouched in front of him eventually, still smiling that same practiced smile, though something colder sat underneath it now that even a 4-year-old could feel. You're a very special little boy, Han Minsuk said. Do you know that? You changed everything. That little charity trick of yours with the towel, that cost me 6 months of very careful work. Cairo didn't understand most of the sentence. He understood the tone. You're a mean man, he said simply. Han Minsuk's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. Maybe, he said. But mean men win more often than kind ones. That's a lesson you'll learn eventually. My mommy says that's not true, Cairo said. She says kindness costs nothing. Even mean people can't take it away. Han Minsuk stood, and for just a moment, something like doubt crossed his face, quickly buried, quickly smoothed over, the way a man buries anything he doesn't have time to feel right now. Outside, tires screeched against wet concrete. Jae-rock had arrived. He walked into that warehouse alone. No guards flanking him, no show of force, because a show of force was exactly what a man like Han Minsuk expected, and Jae-rock had spent 15 years learning that the most dangerous thing you can do to a man who expects a fight is refuse to give him one. Han Minsuk met him in the main room, still smiling, though it had thinned considerably in the last 90 seconds. You came alone, Han Minsuk said. Bold. Or foolish. I haven't decided which yet. Where is he? Safe. For now. That depends entirely on the next few minutes. The two men stood 4 feet apart, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. It was the same silence that had passed between them at the dinner table 3 nights earlier, the silence of two men who understood each other completely and had simply been waiting to see who would break it first. 6 years, Jae-rock said finally. 6 years of watching you become soft, Han Minsuk said. 6 years of watching you build an empire on fear and then throw it away for a maid and her son. You should be thanking me. I was trying to save the organization from exactly this. You were poisoning me. Han Minsuk didn't deny it. He simply tilted his head, almost curious. How long have you known? Long enough, Jae-rock said. Since the boy asked me why I looked sad. I started asking myself the same question. The answer wasn't just grief, Minsuk. It was a slow fever. Someone else's hands, feeding me something for months. Silence again. 4 seconds. The same 4 seconds that had passed between them across a dinner table, except this time nothing softened it. The organization dies with you if you keep them, Han Minsuk said quietly. You know that. A boss who cares about a maid's son is a boss with a weakness every rival in this city will exploit. I'm not your enemy, Jae-rock. I'm the only one in this building who's actually trying to protect what your father built. My father built a prison and called it a legacy, Jae-rock said. I spent 15 years mistaking obedience for loyalty because I never once knew the difference. I know it now. He took 1 step closer. Bring me the boy, he said. And I'll let you walk out of this warehouse alive. That offer expires in 10 seconds. Han Minsuk's jaw tightened. And if I don't? Then everyone in this room finds out exactly what 15 years of being underestimated actually looks like. You've gone soft, Jae-rock. Everyone can see it. The maid, the boy, you let two strangers walk into this house and unravel everything your father spent 30 years building. My father built fear, Jae-rock said. I'm done confusing that with strength. Sentiment gets men killed in this business. Maybe, Jae-rock said. But it's the first thing that's made me feel like a person in 15 years, and I'm not giving it back to you or anyone else. 10 seconds passed in complete silence. Han Minsuk made his choice with a small nod toward the side room, and two of his men brought Cairo out, backpack still clutched tight, eyes finding Jae-rock's across the cold concrete floor with an expression that broke something loose in Jae-rock's chest he didn't have a name for yet. Mr. Tower, Cairo said, voice small but steady. I'm here, Jae-rock said. I told you I'd come. He didn't move toward the boy yet. He kept his eyes on Han Minsuk, on the two men flanking him, on every exit in the room, cataloging threat the way he'd been trained to since he was younger than Cairo was now. Let him go to me, Jae-rock said quietly. Now. Han Minsuk's smile had gone entirely by this point. You'll regret this, he said. The organization won't forgive a boss who chose a maid's son over the family that built him. Good, Jae-rock said. I was never sure the family that built me deserved forgiving in the first place. Cairo crossed the floor in 6 unsteady steps and wrapped both arms around Jae-rock's leg, and for the first time in 15 years, in front of men who had feared him his entire adult life, Kwon Jae-rock knelt down in the middle of an active threat and held a child like the only thing in the room that mattered. Because it was. The fallout took 3 weeks to fully unwind, and none of it was clean. Han Minsuk was exposed within days, not through violence, but through the same patient documentation Jae-rock had built his entire reputation on. Records. Transactions. A doctor's testimony, once he understood exactly how much trouble he was already in. The organization's inner circle, the same men who had smiled and lowered their eyes for years, discovered all at once exactly how much of their own security had depended on a man they'd been quietly betting against. Jae-rock did not celebrate any of it. Victory, it turned out, tasted almost nothing like he'd expected. He'd spent 15 years believing that removing a threat would feel like relief. Instead it felt like standing in the wreckage of a house he'd built with his own hands and finally, for the first time, seeing clearly how much of it had been rot from the beginning. I have to give it up, he told Niria one evening, in the same kitchen where their first honest conversation had happened weeks earlier. All of it. Not because someone's forcing me. Because I can't protect you and Cairo and keep this at the same time. It was never built to hold both. Niria studied him for a long moment. You've spent your whole life being feared, she said quietly. Do you know how to be anything else? No, he admitted. But I know what I don't want to be anymore. I think that might be enough to start. She reached across the counter and, for the first time since she'd arrived in that house, she was the one who touched his hand first. He's not a good man pretending to be dangerous, she said, mostly to herself, working it out loud the way you work out something true. He's a dangerous man. She paused. Choosing, she said. Choosing, every day, to become something better. That's harder than being good naturally. I think that's worth more. Jae-rock didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His hand, closing gently around hers, said enough. The dismantling took longer than the poisoning had, and it cost him more. Ties cut. Loyalties reassigned or released entirely. Debt settled at a loss that would have terrified the man he'd been 6 months earlier and barely registered with the man he was becoming. Every piece of the empire that had made him untouchable, taken apart one careful decision at a time, until what remained of Kwon Jae-rok's kingdom was small enough to fit inside a single legitimate business and a signature on a document that made the rest of it, quietly, someone else's problem. Do-yoon stayed with him through most of it, the only member of the old staff who chose to, and he asked him once, near the end, the question everyone else had been too afraid to ask out loud. Do you regret it? Any of it? Jae-rok considered the question longer than Do-yoon expected. I regret that it took a 4-year-old to show me the difference between being obeyed and being cared for, he said finally. I don't regret giving it up. I regret how long I let myself believe I didn't have a choice. Your father would call this weakness. My father called a lot of things weakness, Jae-rok said. Mercy. Rest. Wanting anything softer than fear. I spent 30 years afraid of becoming exactly what he warned me against, and it turns out the thing he warned me against was just being human. I'm done being afraid of that. Do-yoon didn't have anything to say to that. He just nodded, once, and went back to the paperwork, because some agreements don't need to be spoken out loud to be understood completely. There were harder moments too, nights Jae-rok sat alone with the weight of 15 years unraveling faster than he could fully process, old allies calling to remind him what he was giving up, old enemies calling to gloat, a version of himself he barely recognized staring back at him from a mirror he used to avoid entirely. He almost called it off once. Just once, at 2 a.m, phone in hand, ready to reverse a decision that would have put half of it back together within the week. He thought of a wet towel. He thought of 6 unsteady steps across cold concrete and 2 small arms wrapping around his leg like the only safe thing in the room. He set the phone down. He didn't pick it back up. The final conversation happened at the same gate Cairo had disappeared through weeks earlier, now standing open in daylight instead of rain. You could come with us, Niria said. It wasn't quite a question. Jae-rok looked at her for a long time before he answered. Every man who's ever come near you in Cairo because of me has cost you something, he said finally. The gate. The garden. The warehouse. I won't be the reason that list keeps growing. Not even by staying. That's not fair, she said, and her voice cracked on the word fair in a way that told him exactly how much it cost her to say it evenly at all. No, he agreed quietly. It isn't. But it's the only choice I have left that actually protects you. Cairo, small and confused and already too used to adults making decisions he didn't fully understand, tugged at Jae-rok's sleeve. Are you leaving because you're sad again? He asked. Jae-rok knelt down to his level, and for the first and only time in the entire story, something in his composure broke, not loudly, not dramatically, just a single unsteady breath, quickly gathered back together. I'm leaving so you get to stay happy, he said. That's different from sad. I promise you that's different. Cairo didn't fully understand. He hugged him anyway, tight and unguarded, the way only a child can hug someone they've decided to trust completely. Bye, Mr. Tower, he whispered. Jae-rok held him a moment longer than he needed to. Then he let go. Months later, Niria and Cairo lived in a small, bright house 2 districts away, the kind of ordinary home neither of them had let themselves imagine was possible 6 months earlier. Cairo still asked about Mr. Tower sometimes, usually at bedtime, usually with the particular directness only children manage. Is he still lonely? Niria would sit on the edge of his bed and think about it honestly before she answered, the way she always tried to. He's not lonely anymore, she told him one night, and found, to her own surprise, that she believed it. A package arrived 3 weeks after that, no return address, wrapped carefully, the handwriting on the outside deliberate and precise in a way that suggested someone who didn't write personal letters often but had thought hard about every word in this one. Inside was a document confirming a school fund, fully secured, in Cairo's name. Beneath it, a smaller envelope confirming the modest, quiet, fully paid home they were already standing in, something Niria had assumed, until that moment, she'd simply been fortunate enough to afford on her own. And beneath both of those, a single folded note, 4 words long. You taught me mercy. Niria sat with that note for a long time, in a kitchen far smaller and far warmer than the one she'd left behind, while Cairo played somewhere nearby with a small toy turtle he'd insisted on naming Mr. Tower, because towers could learn to be soft too, he said, if somebody was patient enough with them. She thought about the pantry that first week, the older maid's whisper, the warning in it. You don't say that name loud in this house. She thought about the staircase, for seconds, a man cataloguing her like furniture. She thought about a kitchen at 1 in the morning, and fear can make people quiet but it cannot make them safe, and how strange it was that the truest thing she'd ever said to anyone had been said to a man the whole city was afraid of. She didn't know, that first week, mopping a marble floor that echoed every footstep back like an accusation, that she would end up being the one thing in that entire mansion that never once needed to be afraid of him at all. That night, after Cairo had finally fallen asleep with the toy turtle still clutched in one hand, Niria sat by the window of their small bright house and allowed herself, for the first time in months, to simply miss someone without guarding against the feeling. She didn't know where he was now. The note hadn't said. She suspected it wasn't meant to. But somewhere, she hoped, in whatever quiet life he'd built out of the wreckage of the one he'd given up, Kwon Jae-rock was finally learning what it felt like to be looked after without being told to expect a bill for it. She hoped, wherever he was, somebody was sitting beside him. Because that was the whole lesson, in the end. Not power. Not fear. Not even love, not really, not first. Just, sit beside the ones who are hurting. You don't have to fix them. You just have to stay. She thought of the pantry maid's words again, weeks later, when she finally understood them fully. Maybe he just remembered what it felt like to be looked after, and he doesn't know how to say thank you except like this. He'd said thank you in the only currency he had left once the fear was gone, a school fund, a home, for words folded into an envelope. It wasn't grand. It wasn't a mansion or diamonds or anything the old version of him might have offered. It was quieter than that. And it was enough. Nobody in that mansion had cared whether Kwon Jae-rock lived or died. Not the doctors. Not the guards. Not the men who'd built their loyalty on fear and called it family. Until somebody did. Until a boy too young to understand danger climbed onto a chair with a wet towel and a borrowed sentence from his mother, and changed, without meaning to, the entire shape of a dying man's life. Sometimes that's all it takes. Not an army. Not a fortune. Just one small hand, refusing to let someone stay alone. If this story moved you even half as much as it moved us to write it, subscribe to the channel right now, drop a comment telling us which moment hit hardest, and hit that like button so more people find this story. We've got more like this coming, and we don't want you to miss a single one.